So our second paper, also a conference paper, is user-centered extension of locomotion typology, body-based sensorial cues of different locomotion modes to predict spatial learning, by Carolin Wienrich, Nina Döllinger, Simon Kock, and Klaus Gramann, and Nina is going to present.
Hi, thank you for your introduction. I'm Nina Döllinger. I'm currently working for the University of Würzburg, and the work I'm going to present is part of my master thesis, which I did at the Technical University of Berlin. Virtual environments enable us to visit and create any imaginable environment. You could build up a whole city, visit a mountainscape, do anything in any environment, and when it comes to locomoting and navigating through a virtual environment, unfortunately, the user often is limited to a small physical tracking space. Thus, in order to be able to move through a huge virtual environment, it is most of the times necessary to detect the physical motion from the virtual motion and find some locomotion adaptation. There's been plenty of work to develop locomotion adaptations in virtual reality, which has been summarized 2 years ago by Boletsis, who distinguishes between locomotion types in orders of interaction type, motion type, interaction space, and locomotion type. His work is quite interesting, and I really recommend to read it because I can't go into it further because we don't have much time for it. But unfortunately, it focuses mainly on the technological side of locomotion, and therefore we tried and extended his work by adding some user-centered aspects of locomotion, in particular the perception of locomotion. The perception of locomotion can be divided into body-based motion cues and visual motion cues. The body-based motion cues include kinesthetics and proprioception, which tells you whether your limbs are moving at the moment and where they are. The efference copy, which tells you whether you're moving actively or are moved passively, and the vestibular perception, which tells you where your head is at the moment and helps to balance in every position. The visual motion cues mainly include the visual flow, which you perceive when moving through an environment. And all of these perception cues are relevant when developing spatial cognition inside an environment, for example, for spatial learning, spatial awareness, and the development of spatial representations. And on the other hand, it is important for the user experience inside the virtual environment or when locomoting, for example, the perceived naturalness or efficiency of the locomotion technique. In this work, we mainly focused on the spatial cognition part. Therefore, we set up 2 experiments where we varied the visual input and the physical input of the locomotion techniques. In the first experiment, we added physical motion into the locomotion technique. We started with a simple controller-based locomotion where the participants only had to press a button and were moved, and added physical motion in terms of a motion-based technique when swinging your arms. And our maximum condition was walking in place, where the arms were moving and you were walking, the participants were walking in place. In all of these conditions, the virtual rotations needed to be physical rotations, which means in order to turn around virtually, the participants had to turn around physically. And we expected the increase of physical motion to lead to an increase of the overlap between the physical and the visual locomotion cues, and therefore to lead to an increase of performance in some spatial cognition tasks that we set up for the experiment. In the second experiment, we varied the visual input in terms of the visual step scale. We started with the walking in place condition from the first experiment and increased the visual step scale, leading to a double-sized virtual step and a 3 times bigger virtual step size. Here we expected the increase of visual motion to lead to a decrease of the overlap between visual and body-based motion cues, and therefore to a decrease in the performance in the spatial cognition tasks. The experimental conditions were tested inside a virtual house. The participants had to visit every room of the house and touch specific target objects, which they had to memorize during their visit. And in the end, they landed back in the center, and the doors of the central room closed, and they had to perform some spatial tasks. The first task was a pointing task where the participants remained inside the virtual environment and had to point in the direction of specific of the target objects, and we used the deviation angle between the indicated direction and the actual direction of the object as dependent variable. In the second experiment, the second task was a map task that the participants had to localize the objects inside a 2-dimensional map, which was presented to them outside of the virtual environment, and we again used the deviation angle as dependent variable. The third task was a distance estimation, where the participants estimated the distance between some of the target objects, and here we used the deviation distance. Our hypotheses were for the addition of physical motion, that the addition of physical motion would lead to a performance increase, which means to a reduced deviation angle in the pointing task and the map task, and a reduced distance estimation, deviation distance in the distance estimation. In the second experiment, we expected the increase of visual step scale to lead to a performance decrease, which means an increase of deviation angle and deviation distance. The result of our work was the following. We used repeated measures ANOVA to analyze our results and added the time spent inside the virtual environment as a covariate in the for the second experiment, as we expected it to be important because the participants spend less time with an increased step scale inside the virtual environment. In the first experiment, our analysis did not reveal a difference between the conditions in the pointing task, but did for the map task and the distance estimation. In line with our expectations, the walking in place condition led to a increased performance compared to the arm swinger condition in the map task, but unfortunately, in contrast to our expectations, it was the other way around in the distance estimation, with the walking in place condition leading to a decreased performance compared to the arm swinger. However, the effect size in both significant results were quite low. In the second experiment, our analysis did not reveal any significant result, and therefore, and as our post hoc power analysis showed a great power even for small effect sizes. We decided that we had to reject both of our hypotheses. When we now come back to our motivation, the overcoming of the discrepancy between the huge virtual environments and the small physical tracking spaces, we can say that the controller-based locomotion technique seems to be sufficient to get spatial awareness inside an environment, and the scaling of locomotion does not reduce the performance and seems to be also good. But we have to say that these results are limited to locomotion techniques where the rotations are physically and not only virtual, where two environments that are closed and have visible borders like our house, and two rather simple tasks as we had only 5 objects in each condition. We still think it's important to include the user into a locomotion typology, and with our results we also think it's important to also include the task which needs to be accomplished inside the virtual environment. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so we have time for a few questions.
Hi, I'm Tim from Bauhaus University in Weimar. Thank you for this talk. The last time we used a pointing task in our experiment, we have observed that the scores were quite diverse, so it was really dependent on the participants, and the results were quite widespread. Could you give us any insights about your participants, or have you also captured general spatial abilities of your participants in order to match them with the results?
Yeah, we captured general spatial abilities. And as we already knew that there would be great individual differences, it was an within design experiment, so that every participant did every condition, but we also found a huge span between the participants.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Pablo Figueroa, Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. Did you find any cyber sickness effects in any of the interaction techniques that you used?
There was one participant that had to be excluded in the scaling experiment because she got really cyber sick, but all the other participants reported rather low cyber sickness or no cyber sickness.
So all of them were in some way equivalent?
Yeah, all of them were fine except for the one, but she reported in the beginning of the experiment that maybe she would get cyber sickness because she's really, often getting it.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? So I do have one. Did you, was because the motivation is a small track space that you didn't test real walking, or is that something that you think would be worthwhile testing and comparing to the other techniques?
Yeah, I think it would be good to compare to real walking, but we try to set our focus on small tracking spaces where real walking is no possibility, and wanted to find out which is the best version for these locomotion techniques.
All right, thank you. Let's thank the speaker again.